Guys, welcome to this build of the BREM-1 BREM-1, which is the Russian abbreviation of Armored Repair Recovery Vehicle number 1, based on the T-72 chassis. So what is this thing? It's basically a tank without a turret, or a tank chassis without a turret, used in the recovery of broken down armored vehicles on the battlefield. I built lots of these Trumpeter vehicles by now, many sprues, and I tend to follow the same sort of procedure now, building all of them, which involves, as I sort of show, marking out how many sprues I need per instruction step. I mark up the sprues and proceed as usual on the lower chassis. All these suspension arms, check the alignment as usual in the dry fit, and then we secure them in place using liquid cement. The fits of these Trumpeter kits is generally excellent. I really enjoy them. They have got a high part count, has to be said. There's quite a lot of work to do, but you guys be the judge. I think the end results are excellent. You get a very highly detailed model. And of course, well, these armored repair vehicles, are they popular? I really like them. I like stuff that's a little bit different, if possible. And the fact that they even brought out one of these in plastic, I thought was a miracle. Hence, I did a review on this kit, about 5 years ago. I bought the kit in Japan, brought it and did the review in Indonesia. So if you look way back through my videos, you'll see the review on this kit. Well, it's so good, I wanted to savor it till the end. In this case, we haven't got the side skirts. We've got quite an open chassis sort of, so you can see all the suspension elements. And it is, in fact, easier to use workable tracks just because of the difficulty of painting in that area after construction. I had a couple of options. I think this is probably one of the last times I use metal link tracks. Well, maybe not, but in this case I had them. I bought these obviously a long time ago. I have got a full video explaining the procedure of constructing these. It's a little bit fiddly, but again, once you get into the groove of building these things, it does become quite straightforward. The difference between these and Frools is mainly that they have resin pins to connect the actual individual track links. They are extremely delicate, and also you still need to do the cleanup work on the metal tracks themselves. And there you go. I think it ended up being like 92 links per side. At this stage here, what I'm doing is measuring up to see if I've got a nice snug fit. And I do. And wow, it works. So you can play with it if you want to break it later on. And I used just obviously a piece of wire there just to check the join. Take that off. Take the other side off. And you can see this sort of video is a little bit mixed about. I waited to the last moment to do those tracks. So we're sort of going back here. This is how I assembled the upper hull decking. And again, I repeat myself, test fit. Just make sure you test fit stuff. It's just always a good procedure. And even on this kit as well, there is, some areas that you need to do some cleanup in order to get a nice clean join. So with that upper hull fixed in place, well, nearly, we can proceed with detailing the kit. This kit has, obviously, again, like I said, a Trumpeter kit, lots and lots of parts, lots and lots of details to go on. And also, in this case, the instructions don't entirely help you. If you guys are interested, I have a Patreon. It has another 4 or 5 videos on this particular build. I go through it step by step and explain the actual problems as I encounter them. But in this case, on this kit, It was the actual location of some details that proved to be a little bit difficult, but not unsurmountable. Let's come up with our first modification now, and this is where Trumpeter didn't do a particularly good job. This is how the real thing looks. It has a very short side skirt, which is rubber, and the upper portion also is metal. So what I was going to do was add plastic strips, but I just found it easier to actually just run a groove and scribe a groove into the fender itself to differentiate the rubber component from the metal component. At this stage here, I'm detailing up the side skirts, lots of boxes and details to go on. That's the exhaust there, and that is the basic work completed on the fenders. But now, in order to make them look a little bit more acceptable, the first thing I did was added in the separation between the individual rubber portions on that side skirt, scribing it out really and using a razor saw, just adding some depth there. And if you noticed also on the reference photos, there is a load of bolts, of course, which hold that rubber portion on. Now I found these, I think these are original Grant Line bolts, and I found them in my spares box, and they're just extremely good. Well, can I say better than resin? I can just say easier to work with than resin, because they're actually plastic, so you can just glue them on using normal cement. And this kit has, again, very, very small details. A few methods on attaching here, using a toothpick with a piece of Patafix on it. There are photo etch details. I think these Trumpeter kits, basically, I think they go into the intermediate advanced range just because of the amount of parts and also some PE stuff that you need to deal with. This is definitely not a Tamiya shake and bake type affair, but for people that are looking for maybe a bit more of a challenge and maybe for more interesting subjects or subjects that are a bit niche, Trumpeter definitely does cater for that. This detail here is the fasteners. Fasteners for what? This is a anti-radiation cladding. So the actual detailing here is meant to represent some sort of, I don't know, lead or whatever component is held on with those fasteners. Now, I made this portion workable. It is the blade. It's not in order to be able to manipulate it afterwards. It was just to be able to fit the blade on after the painting stage, and I'll show you why as we go through this video. At this stage, the fenders get joined onto the vehicle, and it's looking more and more like a completed ARV. This is one of the many pulleys that is detailed in the kit. The kit could have offered much better options here. I think they could have shown the cable on, or of course it could have been, left to myself to do that. And this is actually the winch mechanism they're getting fitted on. I think these are supports for the vehicle when it's using the crane, like crane outrigger legs. This part is unnecessarily complicated, suggesting that you run about 80 centimeters of wire through the pulleys. What I did is just cut off individual strands and threaded it through partially to give it the look as if the whole thing has wire rope on it and secured in place with super glue. Just a much easier option. And just a note as well in the references, the actual wires aren't very taut, so it looks kind of unusual, and I try to depict that as well. When I place the wires into their final fixing points, and this, I found out a hack how to fit that later on, that box with the zip boxes within it. Seems every single BREM had those fitted. It's another little detail, some winches that get fixed on the fender, and I sort of left, well, I'll show you later on, left quite a lot of components separate just to aid painting. This is where you would build it out the box, basically. And this is how it would look. This is what I'm trying to illustrate here. But I like to do modifications, so that's what we're going to come on to next. And this is the main one. That indicator for the maximum sort of width should be pointing straight down, because obviously the boom is down, and for some reason Trumpeter show it like at 45 degrees. So very simple scratch building exercise here, using some plastic card to make the little pointer, and then of course removing the existing detail. Just gets carefully scraped off, and I had to remove the sort of bolt at the top, use some liquid cement to smooth the area, and then fixed on the little pointer, making sure it was pointed downwards as it should be. And I think it's not nitpicking, it just is entirely wrong, so I think it's worthwhile doing. Fuel drums. All these Trumpeter kits show these drums attached, but very rarely are they attached to the vehicles. They would only be used in very, very long road marches. Very simple modification, and all it involves really doing is clipping off the parts that are actually the barrel from the drum holders, tidying them up, and then I think finally drilling a small hole through them. And those goes, they get fitted on to the rear deck. You can also see a little bit of detail there. I used some resin T-72 spare tracks there just for the wonderful detail they offer. Another simple mod is adding some wiring for the vehicle's lighting, using some lead wire and fixing the super glue. Pretty easy to do. And the recovery wires as well. Now, on the instructions, it shows about 5 or 6 recovery wires. Again, on references, I saw no more than 2 or 3 on most of the vehicles I looked at. So I only ran 2 on my vehicle. And just as a tip, fixing these down at this stage just aids everything, because they just tend to jump up in the air unless you fix them down with super glue. Unfortunately, the wiring, the actual copper wire or whatever it is that they provide from Trumpeter, it's a little bit thin. It should have been thicker. I didn't have anything, sadly, to replace that wire with. And also, I noticed on some vehicles, they were attached like that. So I definitely wanted this on my vehicle. Just fixing the anti-ditching log. I didn't fix an anti-ditching log. Here's the front blade. Very simple mod is to add scratches to it, just using a coarse sanding stick to depict the wear that obviously the thing abrades when it's used against earth, rock, concrete, etc. And another detail I did notice was this in particular, this mounting for the crane itself. This casting seemed to be particularly, well, it wasn't smooth. It had some texture to it, so it was very easy to use a small battery operated drill milling machine to add some texture, coated again with liquid cement, and add some nice texture. I recommend doing this on all kits, is to get the crack cream out, or Mr. Dissolve putty as it's formerly known, and just tidy up all these little joints, all these little areas. It doesn't take much long, but really it helps the overall appearance, tidies everything up, looks really, really clean in the end. I think it's worthwhile doing this. Some masking added to the optics here. Bit quirky in that there's no actual optics for the driver's hatch, but hey ho. And this is the snorkel, usually fitted on turrets on Russian tanks, but in this case, of course, no turret. And I decided to add some texture, very simple, using some tissue soaked in white glue, wrap it around the plastic part and let it set. So here we are. These are the sort of components individual for painting, as I chose how to paint this vehicle. In particular, leaving all that suspension components individual, and you'll see why as we focus later on in the build. The usual vanilla Mr. Surfacer black finishing surfacer to prime the model. You know what, guys, next time I think I'm going to do something grey or bare plastic to show you it can be done, but maybe this is just more of a habit than anything else now. Mr. Colour, Russian green, surprise, surprise. Choose whichever green you want. I think I get the most comments I ever get on my videos is, what paint do you use? Which paint do you use? And I can only answer Tamiya, Mr. Colour. And the blends that I use, I mix them myself. So initially I'll start off with a base shade, which tends to be out the bottle. It's just way, way easier like that. But then I go on to shades, which I'll make myself by adding other colours to the base colour. The road wheels here, use a template here, circular template, to differentiate the metal portion from the rubber portion of the road wheels. And for the metal tracks, out of the can, Mahogany surfacer just for the initial base work. This gets most of the work done. However, because they're workable tracks, when you actually manipulate the tracks, as you can see here, there will be areas where the paint hasn't gone into. So I used black-brown mixture just to give some depth to these tracks, and that's the sort of base coat there. Seems I used brown as well for the, or khaki brown, it seems, for the fabric covering on top of that snorkel cover. There you go. Looks kind of nice, plain. Nothing wrong with that. If you paint your models just like that and go into weathering, great. What I tend to do is incorporate paint or the paint steps into the weathering steps. So I'm going to add variations to the paint tones. Started off by shading. I'm going to say right now, a lot of this gets eliminated by weathering later on. Really, it just disappears. I thought I'd use the inks to add the shading in a few areas. And I suppose, you know, to be honest, probably not necessary. A different green now. Again, I'm going to explain this step. It shows you, you know, how weathering works or how painting works. And the tone itself looks great. And there is a difference, but there's just not enough of a difference to create any mottling or differentiation. So what I did, I actually added off-white to a green base coat, and here you can see a lot more contrast being created. So this is post-shade technique. Have a look at my T-55, have a look at my T-72 builds, where I did everything via pre-shading. And I just want to show you, you know, there's more than one way of doing things. And this is one method, and you can see this, how much this contrasts. It is entirely a different color. So in order to get that faded in, we go back to yet another green color, and I think I showed 4BO there. So it's very close to that Russian green too. And can you see how everything's getting oversprayed? This is nearly as if a filter's being applied on top. And obviously it's removing the harsh contrast and blending in that mottling. And every single, well, nearly every single component received this treatment. Get a bit of the gloss out here. There are some water stickers to apply. And I don't like to take a risk, especially with the old Trumpeter water stickers. They can be a real mixed bag in my experience. Ni stoi pod streloj. Don't stand under the beam. And you can see also that indicator there as well for the, you see it showing 20 tons at the, and obviously the little indicator got knocked off at that stage. I glue it back on later on. I found my own markings. I think this is a railway movement marker, this one. I thought it looked cool. Get some flat varnish, knock that back. All the usual stuff, just standard things at this stage. Hairspray. Hairspray. Why hairspray? Why not chipping fluid? Because it's all I've got. And we're going to do some treatment on the blade now. I found references with these white stripes. That didn't work at all, so I used the wrong width of masking tape. And then found some, I think that's Tamiya masking tape for curves. Flat white. Spray this on. To do this hairspray technique, more than anything, it's important that you remove that paint as soon as you can, basically straight away, get into it. Before that white has a time to really set, it just makes it way, way easier. So get some sort of weird, raggedy looking brush, work on the white paint, and there you can sort of see that it's starting to dissolve. Very random effect, which is great for some purposes, not great for others. In this case, this is basically exactly what I was going for. Now let's super glue that blade into position. There isn't really a way to make it workable out of the box, and if you wanted to go, extreme measures, I'm sure you could. For me, it's just more important that the thing actually holds itself together. That's all that I worry about with these builds. Let's remove the masking now. We can remove the masking prior to weathering. As you can see, details in this kit are outstanding. They are just awesome. Okay, we are going to add a filter. A filter is what it looks like a wash. That's grey oil paint mixed with some thinner of some sort, probably white spirits or enamel thinner. And there I sort of test it to make sure it is thin and it isn't going to pool around the details. And even if it does, it wouldn't be such a big deal. But the idea here is to lay down some oil paint on top of the airbrush paint. And first of all, this is really, really simple. There's nothing to it. There's no precision needed. You're just getting out a big brush and coating the thing with a grey layer on top. Why do that? Well, one thing is it starts off the weathering for a starter. Yeah, you've made your first move. And second is it lays down some oil on top, which works with the other oil paints in the next steps. Here's my track weathering method. I've done this so many times. Anybody who's seen these videos, but basically I use acrylics for all my tracks now, and I try to use a wet on wet technique using, well, two browns. The first layer I applied with an airbrush, I made it even quicker on myself, and the second lighter brown or the rusty color is applied using a sponge. The idea here is that you keep these paints dilute, everything's wet, it's a bit messy. And then this is the magic ingredient. This is the Life Color liquid pigments. So I think you can do this, you can make this yourself. I think I've explained it in other videos. It is acrylic paint mixed with some pigments. And you apply it again, wet on top of everything. And for tracks, this just works so easy. Now for mud effects, I tend to stick with pigments. And the very first step is I take a whole load of pigments and mix them all together on a plastic container in order that I don't lose them. And you want to mix up some tones, but generally it's a good idea to go with the sort of light, dusty, sandy tones. The dark tones, they don't really work. They don't really work to show dry mud. They just are overwhelmingly too dark. The way that I fix this on is using enamel thinner, X20A. You can use pigment fixer, you can use whatever you guys like to use. This is the old school way of doing this. I don't know, it's the way that I used to do it back in the day, still do it up to this point. And the trick here is that you see that the pigment isn't being touched on. Don't show this very well, but this is about 12 hours afterwards. The pigment's dried on, it dries really well, it fixes on very, very well. And using a very stiff brush, you knock basically nearly all of it off. This shows you off a little bit better. So depicting mud that was stuck to the hull of the vehicle, and through, moving the damn thing, stuff falls off. Very simple, very easy. Now we need to blend that dust effect. So using oil paints here, use 2 oil paints that are in a complementary tone to the dried mud. Mix with some enamel thinner, and this is really simple. You're just going to blob it on, as they say. Obviously on the components that haven't got the thicker part on, you're going to get a nice effect that blends on the dust into the 2 components. In this area here, there's a lot of running gear. You will not see this in the finished model. And let's start adding some tones to the road wheels. This is like layer 1. So just the very initial dust touches. The idea again, keep this dilute. You do not want to wipe out the underlying colors. You don't want to over saturate anything at this stage. So what are we doing here? Well, note the application. Little dots everywhere, and then stippling. And what we're going to do is add this everywhere. The theme on this vehicle, I think this is the most important thing in weathering, is to actually know what you are doing. I think guys right now are way too obsessed with following then I do the chipping, then I do the wash, then I do the artificial straddles. Try to get away from that, guys. Try to have a look at maybe using your own ideas. Have a look at your own references. Have a look at real vehicles outside. Go back in your own experience, have a look at your own cars after you've driven through some mud, and think about what you want to depict. In this case, we know that the whole vehicle was covered in dust, and this is a very easy way of doing this. And the stippling is important. You can see all these graduated blends of dust. The whole vehicle has a touch of this dust, but it's very, very light. And on the road wheels, now that's dried up. Let's add the first metallic effects, which are pretty limited. They just stick to the tow cables themselves. And I use this Mr. Metal Color buffable stuff, which is amazing. It's easy to brush on, and then I use a micro brush to buff the paint to a metallic finish. Very straightforward. And these rollers here, part of the winch, again, get a little buff. For the metal tracks, real easy. Now you can see how they dried, all those different tones. Using a sanding sponge, just lightly roll over the contact points. Very, very simple. All you need to do is touch the guide teeth. There's lots of morons that do weird things with tracks, but believe me, check your references. Have you ever seen shiny portions on tracks that are not where those contact points are? I haven't, but different people. Let's make our own speckling effects, or speckling mud, or splatterable mud effects using, again, you can use, in this case we're using a paste, and we're adding pigment to it, the same sort of pigment that we used on the lower surface. The paste is used because it's an adhesive, and what I'm doing is being sparing with the way it's being applied, and then I'm flicking pigment just on liberally, well, not liberally, no, very carefully around the outside. Again, I checked references to see how mud accumulated on this running gear. And the paste is important. It holds it on, whereas on the hull where you've got like a big flat portion, it sticks on really easily. I think it's using the paste just makes things a bit easier. I splash all the mud effects on the rear of the hull. They just build up over time. You can use more and more effects, and again blend them downwards in the way of gravity. And of course the front blade as well. Let's show some operational use. Again, I checked references. Did the blade get rusty? No, it didn't. I didn't see any BREMs that had a rusty blade to them. Covered with dirt? Yes. So maybe I'm not very imaginative, but I tend to go with what I see in reality. So that's the way I do it. Okay, now we've got what would be a dark wash. This is the way I do things, not entirely my own idea on this, but I'm not applying this dark wash everywhere. I'm applying it in areas that I want to define with more depth, which could be these grills, etc., but not everywhere, because what will happen is if I hit black wash everywhere and all the details, it's going to look odd against the overall dusty effects that we're going to get on the model. And also, if we add it not everywhere, we get a more random look to the vehicle as well. It's the way I like to approach things. At this point now, we can fix on the running gear at long last. Everything's polycapped on this Trumpeter kit. And we can fix on the tracks. This was, of course, a headache to feed them all the way through. Used a little crocodile clip to guide it. They can see the resin pin being pushed into place. I have got a full video on these Masterclub tracks way back when in my playlist. What happens now is the vehicle gets very, very heavy because of these tracks, or the model does. We can assemble more and more of the components at this stage, putting on the parts that were painted separately, and you see they all have that dust layer. And now what I want to do is just get everything together for the, well, let's say the finishing touches of weathering. So I've gone back to Humbrol Enamels here, and what I'm doing is making my own wash mud type effects, and initially airbrushing on some dust up on the sides there. I noticed some references that actually mud got splattered everywhere. I've been a bit conservative on this, to be honest. I haven't could go much further, but I brought it to a stage where it showed what I wanted to show. Deck tan, super duper for dust effects. Again, just hitting some other areas. Does the vehicle need to be chipped? No, it doesn't. These vehicles are not chipped, okay? They aren't rusty hulks. But is the paint wear? Is the paint worn a little bit? Well, yeah, and in this case, hell, I've just used a pencil and it worked absolutely fine. It's super subtle as well. You can get really small little areas of where the paint's been knocked back a bit. I'm not going to say chipped down to bare metal. They just don't look like that, guys. I'm sorry if you think they do, but they just don't. And these are zip boxes. They're aluminium. On the latches, in some cases, yeah, they've got metallic effects. So metallic pencil again. Being, again, careful. Again, less is more. I really think it just is the case with a lot of these effects, particularly anything strong like metallics. Let's add some variation. These road wheels, they look a bit boring because they're just, even though I had different tones of pigment, adding in that secret component makes them dark. Join my Patreon, support me guys if you want to know more about weathering, and I will walk you through them. This is one area that did have rust, and it was the actual roller on the on that winch there. So just did a few little touches, just light touches. That's all that's required. And also the fixings there. Again, back to Humber enamel, this time using sand color, making my own wash, adding some pigments to give it some bulk and thickness. What is all this stuff? Is it a wash? Is it a splatter technique? It's paint. That's all it is. It's just paint. So we'll add some runs of mud in certain areas. Of course, there's no big side skirts on this vehicle. Very important to blend. Very, very important to blend. Blend all your effects. And the back deck I thought was like a bit boring, so I added a little bit more of these mud effects just in random areas on the back deck. You don't see much of this. A lot of this gets covered up by that big stowage box and stuff, but again, blend it. A few light metallic effects on the blade. Didn't see this in reality, but it's nice to add a little touch like this. Again, be subtle. Don't forget the marker lights. The marker lights are red, and black smoke pigment for the exhaust to complete our weathering. I think that completes our weathering. Yeah, and this is sort of the vehicle. Crew. I've got a new video on the crew, so that will be coming out soon. Hope you enjoyed the video, guys. See you on the next one.